All right, everybody. Today we're going to talk about lease agreements, and let's talk about the way a lease is structured in the business. First of all, most businesses end up working for their landlords. They don't end up working for themselves because they put themselves in a situation where they're in a lease that they can no longer negotiate, they can no longer get out of, and it costs them a ton of money. I mean, if you stop and think about it, you want to buy $1 million house. Well, $1 million house with 5% down is $5,000 a month. Own $1 million piece of property. There's a lot of people that are getting a whole lot less than $1 million piece of property, and they're spending way more than $5,000 a month to do it. So realistically, $5,000 a month means I can buy myself $1 million property. $5,000 a month in rent is something that I don't get back. It's a check that goes to the landlord. So first of all, I need to look at how am I going to determine what I should be paying in rent? Is there like a basic line that I should be looking at? As a rule of thumb, now this isn't written in stone because every business is different, but as a rule of thumb, you don't want your lease price to exceed 10% of your revenue. So if your lease is $3,000 a month, your revenue needs to be around $30,000 a month. If your lease is $6,000 a month, your revenue needs to be around $60,000 a month. You want to maintain that 90% ratio of around lease to revenue. It gives you a lot more money to play with. Plus a lease contract, once you're in it, it's really hard to renegotiate. Chances are it's full of personal guarantees and a lot of things that protect the landlord but don't protect you. So if your lease is higher than 10%, you don't have a lot of room to play with. I've encountered businesses before where their lease has been as high as 25, sometimes even 30% of their revenue, and basically they're done. They're dead in the water. There's literally nothing they can do about it. So when should I have my leases greater than 10%? The only time your lease should be greater than 10% of your revenue is if you've projected your revenue growth to justify that lease in 3 years or 5 years, because it's going to take time to build up into that space. So have you justified it on paper to know that you can afford this, or are you just saying, you know what, I need the space, so I better move? The second thing with lease and lease agreements is a lot of times there's more property available than there is tenants. And in fact, the way after this whole COVID thing and the way business stuff is shifting, there's more and more commercial real estate available and less tenants. We've had clients that are in the leasing world, and they've been telling us that there's overpopulation of buildings compared to tenants. But most tenants don't realize this. Number three, everything in your lease is negotiable. Everything in your lease is negotiable. So sit down and orchestrate and understand what you need from a lease before you ever sign that lease and get yourself trapped into something. Another thing to consider with your lease is, do you have to be predominantly in the public eye, or is your business more of a destination location? Because you're going to pay more for that public eye space. That's why they charge premium on that kind of real estate. So you're going to pay more. Now, let's say being public eye means that your lease is going to be higher than 10%. Well, what kind of foot traffic is that going to generate you? Is that going to justify an additional 5% revenue cost to go towards that lease? Because 5% of your income should be dedicated toward marketing. So if you're willing to challenge your entire marketing budget into that lease because of the foot traffic you're going to get, is that justifiable? Have you researched the businesses that are around that property to find out what their foot traffic is like? Have you asked the other tenants what their rent is like? Have you looked at what their agreements are? Have a conversation. But a lease is a really dangerous thing to have in a business because it can easily cripple you or put you under. And it's one of those things you can't control. So be smart about your lease. Run your numbers to make sure you're around 10% to your revenue. Run your numbers to make sure that if you need to justify a public eye space, that you can afford the extra 5%. Realize that every percent you're paying towards your landlord is 1% less you've got towards profit, operational costs, and variable costs that allow your business to keep moving. So use the 10% as a guideline. Don't make it a rule. Use it as a guideline and ask yourself, can the business justify the rent that I'm paying? I had a conversation with a gentleman who's like, hey man, I'm going to go start a small engine repair shop and my lease is going to be $6,000 a month, but it's a beautiful location. I'm going to move in there next week. I said, just pause for a second, hold the phone. What is your plan to get to, in this situation, $60,000 in revenue a month or $720,000 revenue in a year? What's your plan to get there? He's like, why? I don't really have a plan to get there. I said, okay, well, if you're going to do small engine repair, what's the time it's going to take you to repair an average small engine? What's the margin you're going to be putting on your time? Is the market willing to pay for it? What's that going to look like? Because be honest, like an average small engine is $300 to $800 to buy a brand new one, depending on the engine. So if it takes more than 8 hours of work, why wouldn't somebody just go buy a new motor versus having you fix it? So you got to justify and look at every aspect of it. And my whole conversation with him went back to the rent. I said, if you can't do $720,000 a year, but you can only do $360,000 a year, well, now your rent is 20%. Well, what are you going to do in the next year after that to get it down to where it's supposed to be, around the 10%? He didn't have an answer for me, and he never went and started the business. And I'm kind of glad he never started the business because he would have been locked into a lease with personal guarantees and stuff that puts him in a really risky situation. Not only that, it's lease terms. How long are you willing to be trapped into this contract? Of course, a lease company that owns the building wants you to be in for 5 to 10 years. They want to know it's 5 to 10 years. But here's the thing. They put you in a 5 to 10 year lease, and they're always increasing your payments on you. They're making it variable to rise with market and inflation. So there's a lot of risk in running a lease property if you're not going to go through the lease agreement. If you're going to be lazy enough to not, if you're going to be too lazy to go through the lease agreement, at least go through it with your lawyer and make you understand what you're getting into. A lease is a very dangerous proposition for business. Make sure you can run one without it. And if you have to have a lease, do your homework first. Until next time.